Who is up for a great whodunit? Major Mike Webb has actually been involved in conducting investigations since college, serving on the honor committee at the prestigious Washington and Lee University. As an Army legal specialist with the 2nd Ranger Battalion in Fort Lewis, he aided in prosecuting complex drug ring cases post-wide, one of the largest in history, and prepared line-of-duty accident investigation reports for national security-sensitive operations. He was trained as an all-source tactical and military intelligence analyst at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and was assigned as initially the aide-de-camp for Echelon Above Corps Strategic Counterintelligence for the entire United States Army stationed within the continental United States, where he played a key role in operations in support of apprehending Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh after the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, as well as 1 year later the Atlanta Olympics, as well as the prosecution of the last 3 major espionage cases involving Aldrich Ames, the Walker spy ring, and Robert Hanssen. So you might call him a subject matter expert. In fact, the Major Mike Webb was not only aware of the Defense Intelligence Agency that ABC News reported in April, which had been alleged to inform the president about an outbreak in Wuhan, he actually played a key role in its creation. So when he became aware of an emerging public health emergency of international concern, he not only did not have to come up a steep learning curve on virology and epidemiology, but he also knew the clues to look for in a pandemic crisis, which in recent weeks has triggered more concerns that a novel coronavirus, alleged to be a zoonotic evolution from bats that emerged in an animal market, was not just a natural freak occurrence. The recent funeral for George Floyd broadcasted scenes from within a church sanctuary that had been forbidden violations of social distancing for weeks, and even found one Louisiana pastor in prison for his refusal to cancel his Easter service. Did the pandemic crisis just disappear? Like the protesters and rioters, is it just mere coincidence that they knew the exact moment that the all clear was sounded, that an invisible enemy had become no longer a threat? Did it only take one of 135 deaths per month during an arrest to say the words "I can't breathe" to make a lethal pathogen that has killed over 1,300 Virginians alone, over 700 of them elderly residing in nursing homes, disappear? While it is true that government scientists have known since at least 2014, when the Institut Pasteur in France studied the MERS virus, one of now 3 known to be potentially lethal human coronaviruses from a total of 7, that a combination of heat, humidity, and ultraviolet radiation render human coronaviruses non-viable, with little prospect of surviving long, especially in sub-Saharan climates. And it is possible, but not probable, that a national protest movement decided to reject on its own the official government medical guidance that has been publicized by both the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control since the discovery of the novel coronavirus, that this pathogen was somehow different, apparently a conclusion to which they established with no evidence at all. Even today, most every major news publication is warning of another outbreak in the summer, again based upon no experiential reference or known science. In fact, a lot is known about the nature of human coronaviruses, and most people over the past decade have probably been infected by at least one of the 4 most popular human coronaviruses and did not know it. In fact, the Center for Disease Control actually has a sheet, a fact sheet, number 58, detailing everything that you need to know about the most common human coronaviruses. Like the current contagion, most infections require no medical treatment, and generally they share many of the same respiratory tract infection symptoms, the same means of infection transmission, and similarly share the characteristic that they are an infection for which there is no known cure. Since 2003, in a National Institutes for Health study of the SARS virus, government scientists have known that these human coronaviruses can survive up to 96 hours in human feces and up to 72 hours in human urine. And nonetheless, government scientists have determined that the current pandemic pathogen has exhibited only rare instances of fecal shedding. But for unknown reasons, government scientists have decided to wipe the board clean, discarding a base of known science about the viral type, and have attempted launching a brand new evolving science, discarding a base of known science about the viral type for a pathogen that has rapidly become a public health emergency of an international concern, which has resulted in the deaths of over 350,000 people worldwide. One of the golden rules of the investigative process is that the past is the best predictor of the future, a paradigm from which government scientists, currently including the Centers for Disease Control, have departed, even on the inefficacy of household materials to provide sufficient protection from microbial infection, as determined in a 2010 study commissioned by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Just as Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, has advanced the baseless proposition that a bandana, the signature uniform for the domestic terror group Antifa, will prevent infection, rejecting the conclusion of both the New York Times and the common sense determination that a bandana would not provide protection from tear gas, for which the smallest configuration of active ingredient is 6 times larger than the largest SARS-CoV-2 particle. But using the investigative methodology, it is known that even in Wuhan, over 80% of those who were infected required absolutely no medical treatment at all, according to the World Health Organization Joint Mission Report published on February 24th. This finding confirms the conclusion that SARS-CoV-2 is not a casual contact contagion for purposes of development of disease, but requires accumulation of a sufficient critical mass of contagion for an infected person to escalate to a hospitalization, about the equivalent risk for a hobbyist skydiver being injured in a parachute jump. More concerning, however, is the fact that that report determined that the Chinese government only implemented the draconian lockdown for which Dr. Anthony Fauci pressed the president to adopt only in the Hubei province, where there was a definite evidence of an outbreak out of control. And more alarmingly, just as the pathogen somehow predominantly targeted American tourists aboard the cruise ship Princess Diamond, according to the Centers for Disease Control study dated March 27th, in an 8-city metropolis, the pathogen in Wuhan appeared to target primarily farmers in the outlying areas, the political opposition in an economy transitioning from a traditional industry to technology paradigm. What is known is that the biological agent, which requires a human host, managed not only to escape the lockdowns in Wuhan, but also was able to engage in an invasive pattern during an international departure, avoiding the top 15 popular destinations from Wuhan Airport, and somehow deploying in critical mass to South Korea, conveniently, the avowed enemy of the Chinese Communist government, as well as to Iran, South Korea's trade partner since 2016. What is known is that the biological agent replicated this deviant migration pattern upon arrival to the United States, avoiding LAX in preference for SeaTac when traveling across the Pacific, and avoiding JFK in preference for Logan, during its transatlantic migration. And it has, since arrival in the United States, continued to defy normal migration patterns, as in the example of the devastation in St. John Parish, Louisiana, a community that is 50 miles southeast of Baton Rouge. However, since January, when SARS-CoV-2 touched ground in Washington state, it has been known that the elderly in nursing care facilities were a vulnerable population for whom infection could be lethal. Nonetheless, states like New York and Pennsylvania ordered nursing homes to accept infected patients, despite the fact that on March 27th, the Center for Disease Control endorsed the findings of the World Health Joint Mission report that persons locked down in living arrangements for extended periods of time and in close contact were breeding grounds for community infection outbreaks, resulting in thousands of deaths. Moreover, the Joint Mission report also emphasized that the elderly needed to be protected from this contagion. As of May 1st, nursing home deaths accounted for over 65% of the deaths in Pennsylvania, 58% in Delaware, 46% in Maryland, and 40% in New Jersey, according to the Burlington County Times. But Governor Northam, the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, did nothing at all to protect the fatalities of the elderly in nursing homes, who today account for more than half of the SARS-CoV deaths in Virginia. But the death toll may be even higher for the nation's only physician serving as governor, because not all nursing care facilities were required to include their statistics in the latest report, and they were only required to begin doing so on May 1st. Yet, the high mortality of elderly in nursing home living arrangements tends to validate the conclusion that the contagion is not spawning infection conventionally, because there has not yet been in the statistics a related incidence of hospitalizations and mortality for persons confined in apartment-style living arrangements, who, by nature of economic demographic, tend to be persons with similar risks due to poor health care and chronic diseases that have been exploited by the contagion, with the exception of high-profile cases in New York, in communities like New Rochelle and Brooklyn, but which have left communities like Alexandria with only 45 deaths to date, and with over 21% of its population in the African American demographic, who have, for unknown reasons, demonstrated remarkably low disease statistics, despite close proximity to high infection localities like the District of Columbia, Arlington, and Fairfax County. In Virginia's 8th congressional district alone, this should be over 150,000 households that seem to have gone below what would have been expected under a normal, conventional pattern of proliferation. In the course of a complex investigation, there occurs what is often referred to as a hot wash, or a progress in view, to organize a summary of the key facts, to develop a more refined picture of the situation, and to formulate preliminary conclusions upon which to proceed further. And in this pandemic crisis, it is clear that persons, particularly those in lower economic strata and primarily ethnic minority demographics, remain at great risk in the Commonwealth of Virginia and many other parts of the country if the manipulators of this pathogen decide to redirect its force. Moreover, it is clear that the risk of mortality for elderly persons residing within nursing homes was not only known from the outset, but in cases like New York and Pennsylvania, exacerbated by actions implemented by state governments, and in cases like Virginia, where a known risk was completely ignored, most alarmingly by the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, directly responsible to date for over 700 deaths of elderly citizens. While there may be times when leaders must sacrifice a few for the sake of the many under a defense of necessity, it is abundantly clear that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where a draconian lockdown that even the Chinese government reserved for an outbreak out of control in Wuhan Ralph Northam took this drastic action at a time when there were less fatalities than in a standard commercial airline crash, and under circumstances under which there were clearly other legal and ethical alternatives. In many other states, companies that manage elderly care facilities are beginning to petition government officials for release from liability for the deaths that were beyond their control. And several newspaper publications like USA Today have begun to address this situation where government leaders abdicated their obligation to protect these vulnerable citizens. But in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the nation's only physician serving as a state governor has been evading the sheriff's department to avoid service of a summons in a civil action that was filed to enjoin him from pursuing this reckless course back in April, and to date, which has claimed the lives of over 700 senior citizens. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest.
You're a mountain from which there flows a fountain. So let its water wash my sins away. 'Cause I am a seeker and you are a keeper. You are a teacher, won't you teach me the way? Reach out and lead me, guide me and keep me in the shelter of your care each day. 'Cause I am a seeker and you are a keeper. You are a leader, won't you show me the way?
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.